Welcome to Entromy's Private Equity Impact Series, where we bring you real stories from the field that showcase how data, insight, and advisory expertise converge to accelerate value creation with some of the largest private equity firms in the world. Today's conversation is about what happens when a high potential portfolio company hits an inflection point, not in its numbers, but in its leadership dynamics. Joining me today is Madeleine Titze, who is a consultant and coach with Bridges Consulting and works primarily in the private equity space with PE firms and their portco leaders. In this case, Madeleine worked with our tool, integrated her own qualitative findings, and ultimately got to an in-depth analysis, which helped our client realize some very needed insights. Employees didn't have a great confidence level in senior leadership's ability to execute on the growth strategy, even though they love the mission, believe in the vision, and want to win. She navigated the murky waters to pinpoint where support was needed and how to make execution actually work. If you're a consultant, operator, or investor looking to understand how modern organizational diagnostics can deepen your influence and accelerate transformation, this is the conversation for you. Let's dive in. Madeleine, nice to see you.
So good to see you, Matt. Thanks for having me.
I'd love to start right at the most impactful point. Was there a moment in this engagement where you felt like something clicked, where maybe Entromy's insights surfaced, something that shifted your thinking or maybe the client's direction?
Yeah, absolutely. This was a really interesting case where you have a multi-site operation that overall was doing pretty well from a culture and engagement standpoint. And the Entromy organizational health data reflected that. People were pretty excited about being there. They enjoyed their leaders. They felt bought into the mission. They cared about the work, yet the growth was not there and the business was really struggling. And so where the insight really came from Entromy is when we double click deeper on the data, the organization feels generally healthy, but what is this X factor? The X factor really was that employees didn't feel like leaders were going to make the appropriate investments in what needed to happen to drive growth. And so while they loved the work, they were fired up. If you ultimately feel like my leaders are not going to give me the tools I need to be successful and deliver on the outcome, retention's going to fall, and you're going to lose really talented people. And so even though culturally so many things were going well, the gap was employees felt like the resourcing was not at the appropriate level. And so that was a really good aha moment for us, and then gave us the chance to go deeper on, okay, what would that investment look like? What would the resourcing needs actually be to drive success?
And so when you found this, insight, what was kind of the reaction from the client? Because sometimes these insights can be really hard for leaders to hear, but I'm kind of curious, how did they handle it?
I think it was honestly a relief in some ways that they had some clarity because I think everybody was working hard. It wasn't for lack of everybody's all bought in. We want this to work. But I think the leaders didn't realize and had a bit of a blind spot, which often happens around how distant the expectations and the resourcing felt for employees. They didn't feel like they had the infrastructure they needed to be successful, the investment in talent development. And so I think it was sort of an aha moment. They were quite open to the fact that, hey, we've got to do things differently to make sure our employees are set up to go deliver on what we need them to deliver on.
So if it's all right with you, I'd like to step back just for a minute, get a little bit of the background here. Could you briefly describe the client organization and really what made this engagement unique?
Yeah, so this is a large operation that has a national footprint and it's a multi-site type operation. So you've got all kinds of different leaders that are operating in a really fragmented environment, right? There's not a one corporate shop where leaders are together and spending a lot of time together. Rather, you've got this really national footprint, which just makes things harder from like a communication and prioritization standpoint because everybody's kind of doing their own thing, which is why I think Entromy was so particularly helpful because we can drill down into the actual data by location to understand sort of what's happening in each of the regions. So I would say that's what made this a little bit more challenging is just like the breadth and the operating differences across the entire platform. But again, the Entromy data was really helpful in pinpointing where there were similarities, where there were differences, and where we needed to go deeper.
And so thinking back to maybe the first couple of conversations with this particular organization's leaders, what were some of the initial challenges that they presented you with? And what were some of your initial inklings in terms of maybe the symptoms and maybe even that root cause that they were trying to explain?
I think they knew they had an issue with customer both acquisition and retention. So they were having a hard time getting new business, and they were also having a hard time retaining existing business. But again, I think there was a lack of understanding in terms of what was driving that. And interestingly enough, getting closer to the front line, really listening to the employees that were on the ground floor via the Entromy data is what gave us the insight into why customers were likely to leave, why they weren't attracting new customers. There was a real gap in accountability, which we can talk more about too. And so in terms of some of their customer acquisition strategies, the strategy was great, but there was no accountability to actually make sure employees were delivering on this. And so it was interesting. I think, again, a blind spot at the top, but really getting the voice on the front lines illuminated where those challenges were.
And so I want to think through kind of the diagnostic process. And can you walk me through maybe part of your diagnostic process and really to understand how did the Entromy data influence your insights, or how did it kind of change how you perceived what was going on?
Yeah, I always tell people as a consultant, I cannot come in and say what you should do until we have a really thorough look under the hood. So it's never like a plug and play, this is how we think we should solve the problem. It's really going deep to understand what are the root causes of the problem and what are the most important things for us to solve for. So in this particular project, we did two things in tandem. One, we ran the Entromy Organizational Health Survey, which gives both that broad perspective on how the organizational is doing collectively, and then also rolls up leader-specific information as well. So you can look leader by leader, how is this person being rated within all of the folks that roll up to them? In tandem to that, we also did qualitative interviews. So our firm at Bridges, we do a lot of organizational interviews where we conduct effectively listening sessions with folks to get their qualitative feedback. This was a really cool process where we got to bring both of those things together. And so each leader got this really robust review of how things were going within their organization that combined both the Entromy data to say, hey, here's some of the quantitative stats on where things are going well in your organization. And then we added color and context by adding these qualitative interviews to say, here's what we're actually hearing from your team. One example, there was a leader who was extraordinarily well-liked, very people-centric, yet big gap in terms of being able to hold people accountable. So there was a lot of churn in his organization, both on the Entromy side of the data and on the qualitative interviews, because he was super likable, but he was not setting expectations and managing out poor performers. And it was really frustrating his team. So I think ideally you have that blend of both, where you do have the quantitative and Entromy type data, and then you can blend in some of those qualitative conversations too.
Thinking through all of the data that you potentially collected, how did you go through all of the data to get those findings? And then what were those maybe top few findings from your interviews, and then also kind of incorporating Entromy's data?
I always say that strategy is just as much about what you say no to as what you say yes to. And I think the best leaders are really good at getting clear on these are the 2 or 3 critical few items we can't not do versus these are the worthy many initiatives we want to go pursue. So I do think it's super important, and it's really overwhelming for a CEO if you come back and share the 20 things that they can go get after and solve for the organization. Really, I think there should be 2 to 3 core things. So in this particular instance, there was an interesting blend of things that required a big lift from a resource standpoint and those that didn't. So first thing we recommended is you have an accountability opportunity here, and the organization is asking for you to create a more performance-based culture versus just this really supportive familial culture. And so the first thing we said is create a culture of accountability on your leadership team. There needs to be clear priorities, there needs to be clear expectations, and the leaders need to get more proactive in actually managing the results and performance of their teams. The organization is begging for this. And so that was priority 1, which takes basically nothing in terms of an actual investment in resources. It's just time and leading differently. 2 was invest in one of the core themes that came out was around talent development, and that there was a big gap in terms of training, and that was leading to issues in terms of execution. And so our second recommendation was really invest in a talent development person, somebody that can take this on in the org and really start to streamline and level up the talent across the board, talent, training, recruitment, you name it. Third was to make really targeted investments in terms of infrastructure updates. So this is related to the physical infrastructure of the properties, knowing that, of course, you can't do everything at once. Where are those places that the Entromy data shows us are heat maps in terms of issues, and that we know there are major physical limitations? And then we encouraged really targeted investments in those areas. So a bit on the leadership side, a bit on the talent side, and a bit on the physical infrastructure.
So Madeleine, when you are showing the clients these findings, were there any surprises? Did the leaders at this organization say, oh my gosh, we had no idea? Or was it more confirming some of their own intuition and their own gut feelings?
Both and. I would say where it confirmed initial feelings is there was some sense that there were some lower or moderate performers on the team. And I think the Entromy data really affirmed that these people are actually not driving results. The engagement is lower. You've got to make a move. You've either got to need to coach these people up or coach them out. So I think it affirmed and gave the executive actually some confidence in making those harder decisions. Where there was maybe a surprise, I think there were a couple. I'm trying to think of the most salient to share. I think probably the biggest surprise was, again, just the lack of belief generally that they could go execute on the growth strategy, and that there was just such misalignment between what people felt like they needed to be successful and what they had to be successful. And so I think like just knowing that was a big gap was an aha moment.
What were some of those prioritization considerations? How did you really get to say, hey, this is maybe number one, this is number two? How did you get to that kind of a conclusion?
Whenever you have any kind of engagement where you're asking a broad organization for feedback, I think it is mission critical that you get some quick wins on the board, and you also close the loop very quickly to show the organization that you heard them. I think nothing is more maddening for employees than, okay, you've asked for my feedback and then it goes into a vacuum and I hear nothing, or you do nothing. I think that's like the worst case scenario. Don't ask the question if you're not going to listen to the employees and actually close the loop. Doesn't mean you do everything, but you have to close the loop. And so in terms of prioritization, I'm always thinking about what's the quickest win that's going to earn some credibility in the process first and foremost, and also have the biggest business impact. Sort of our initial thought on that culture of accountability was this is an immediate change that leaders can start to implement that's going to impact the most people in terms of building that performance culture. And it's also going to signal to the broader company that, hey, we heard you and we're willing to adapt our own style as leaders based on your feedback. And then I'd say beyond that, I want to close the loop. We want to have quick wins, and we also want to make sure we're doing the biggest impact items. So for example, in this particular case, there was a lot of concern around employee compensation. There were a number of other sort of, I'd say, secondary or tertiary concerns that came up. And while super valid and important, we know that organizations are only going to have the capabilities to do so many things at a time. And so again, we're looking at what's going to make the biggest impact to the business in the near term, and then helping executives really pace that out. So we like to put together, here are those three clear buckets that you should go after now. Here's what we see as medium-term priorities based on the Entromy data, and here's what we see as longer-term aspirational based on the data, but really help executives kind of chunk that out.
Great. That's super helpful, Madeleine. And now I think if we could, I'd love to talk a little bit about kind of the impact. What was the expectation?
Sure. And I'll speak really quickly to what we did see in the short term. To your point, it's early in this journey, so we'll have more to report later. But one of the things that we do is actually meet one-to-one with executives to go through their findings, both their Entromy data and some of those qualitative interviews. And that's a really powerful moment, just an immediate powerful moment for people. And some of the things I heard in those conversations were like, wow, I now feel like I have been emboldened to build this culture of accountability, to set higher standards for my team. I felt like I had to play it really nice. And now I know that I can be this relational leader, but people want me to be a little bit firmer. And so just like the immediate term change was that people felt really emboldened to step into their roles. In terms of longer term impact, I think if these initiatives drive forward, what we'll see is better focus and clarity in the organization that's going to result in more consistent execution on the things that matter, retaining their customers and growing the business. And so I would hope in the next 6 to 9 months, they're making material progress in both of those because they've got clear focus on the priorities. They have clear accountability. They've got a system for reporting up on progress, and they're just tracking execution better. So time will tell, but I'm very hopeful.
One of the things that, as you're kind of entering a new engagement, you might not know is how these leaders in this organization are going to react when you do kind of show them how things are working. Some people, like I've said, are a little bit argumentative. Maybe they kind of know what they need to hear these sorts of things. It's the cure is kind of in the medicine. But when you were talking with the leaders in this organization, walking them through the findings, what were some of their initial reactions to the data and to kind of your work?
I will give credit to this leader, extremely open, very coachable. You can tell a lot about a leader and an executive about how they react when they get feedback. And it is human nature to have a strong reaction. Myself have plenty of reactions to the feedback given to me. It is a very emotional response for people. But I really, really appreciate the leaders who can sort of understand that this is part of the job, right? And the interesting thing is the higher you go in an organization, the less comfortable people generally are giving you feedback. We always say the air gets pretty thin at the top. And so the opportunity to get feedback like an Entromy survey or 360 interviews really is a gift, not to be cliche, but most executives do appreciate the fact that, okay, it is hard for people to give me this feedback based on my position in the organization, and I should be really grateful that I have all this feedback. But certainly you get those that are less amenable to it, and those are hard conversations. And I always tell people you don't have to agree with feedback to learn from it. And so if you can sort of separate out the debating it and just focus on what do I want to glean from this, it tends to be a more productive conversation.
So, Madeleine, I want to think a little bit more broadly about your background. I'm sure you've used quite a few different tools as you're helping organizations learn about themselves and grow. And so how would you kind of describe Entromy's role in your toolkit?
Yeah, Entromy is the only survey tool that we partner with closely, and we do that for a couple of reasons. One, I and our team just really appreciate the analytic capabilities. I love how you can slice and dice the data and get really, really clear on where the potential problems are, where the strengths are to leverage. And just the analytical rigor and the ability to bifurcate the data is really, really helpful from a consultant standpoint. The other thing is I can't stand a survey that doesn't give me a good so what. So if there is okay, you got a 6 out of 10 on communication, that tells me nothing in terms of what a 10 would look like. And so what I appreciate in the Entromy data is that they're really good at the so what. So here are the findings, and this is what we think you can do about it, versus here is some obtuse data without clarity around what action steps would mitigate it. That I find really frustrating as a consultant. So the Entromy tool is good from a so what perspective. I know what actions the client can take. And again, I think the analytical rigor and the ability to slice and dice is part of none.
And so what would you say maybe to another consultant who's considering using Entromy's tool? What kind of advice would you give them?
I mean, I'd say go for it. One, it's been really helpful and insightful to us. And our consulting firm is a very high touch. We want to spend time one-to-one with leaders. And while that's super valuable, it's also really nice to have a broad organizational health baseline. Like it would be challenging for us to go interview all 1,000 employees. It's great for us to interview a cross-section of employees and then augment that data with the voices of all employees. So I think it's only going to add to your consulting practice and give you really clear insights on where you can best support your clients.
Madeleine, if we were to quote you on the single biggest benefit Entromy delivered during this engagement, what would you want that quote to say?
I'd say Entromy will give you the data to make good decisions. And ultimately, that's what we're trying to do is help executives make good, informed decisions to improve their organization's performance. And Entromy is a phenomenal tool in giving you the data to make great decisions.
Is there anything else that you'd like to add to this conversation about maybe this engagement or about the tool or about your process in general?
That's another good question. I'd say in terms of just partnering, I've really just appreciated the people at Entromy, yourself and Jason and Alana, and there's just great people to work with. And so that matters to us. This is a relationship business, and you should feel good about the people you're working with. And so as a consulting partner, we've had a really good experience. I'm so grateful for that and feel like we can have utmost confidence going into a client engagement together, knowing that Entromy is going to be a great partner for us and for the client. So I think I'll leave it at that. We love working with you.
Madeleine, thank you so much for your time. It's been great to get to know you a little bit better and hear a little bit more about how this experience worked for you. And we're really just excited to see this partnership blossom. Thank you so much.
You bet. Thanks, Matt.
And